And so this is the second novel in the series. Hedverian Heist came out in December. And then coming really soon, February 9th, is a novella in the series, Song of Parting. And it's so pretty. I'm really excited. So if you've read the first novel in the series, Buried Heroes, and want something kind of between it and Hedverian Heist, or if you've read all the published novels thus far, February 9th, Song of Parting will be lovely. Or if you're coming in new to the series, it will work really well for that too. And our lovely friends in chat, thank you all. That means the world to me.
Fuel in the tank. So, honey,
I can't read the yellow.
Oh, tink tink.
Oh, thank you. It's just a little too small on my screen. So it's like, it says something. It's sideways. Sorry. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. This is really fun. I'm really happy that we're here.
Honey, what are we talking about today?
Okay, so we are going to dive on into incorporating PC backstory in the short and long term. So this topic came about in part because of the so often heard advice. So if you're at all familiar with playing one-on-one D&D, and if not, that's okay. But if you're at all familiar with it, you know that one of the most often said things to DMs is that you should make the campaign all about the PC. So it should revolve around the player and what they want, as well as their character and what they want. I think that there's some wiggle room there, just kind of depending on especially the PC's character. But one way that we have found that works really, really well to follow this advice, as well as give your player flexibility, is to keep the story centered on the PC by grounding the action of the story, the events related to the PC's interest in their backstory. So if you have like a more reserved PC, for example, who maybe isn't going to want to storm the castle immediately, that's okay. Maybe that's something that you can kind of play into. So as an example, because that's one of the things that we're focusing on here, honey, this recently came up in your prep for our duet campaign. So not our Tales of Eldora game, but our home game that you DM for us, and led to a really cool arc. So can you maybe give us like a high level overview of that? What were you thinking at the time? Maybe just give us an overview first, and then I have questions.
Are you talking about New Horizon?
Mm-hmm.
So we play every single weekend, which is more than I think a lot of people could say about their D&D experiences. Like, that's one of the magical things about playing one-on-one, right? Is that it's a lot easier to manage two people's schedules, especially if they're living together, right? Than it is to coordinate a big party. So we just get to play a lot, and we spend hours every weekend running around our co-created world together and having adventures, and it's a magical, wonderful time magical, wonderful way to spend time with each other. So, in a recent arc, we took Beth's player character Persephone into a kind of a fallen demi-plane where there was it sounded like a dark aspect of her people's god was collecting her people there, and basically making a new promised land for them. And as happens in D&D, turns out not actually the case, and actually was an escaped demon lord masquerading, and they were using the people to drive a hole into the threads of fate, unleashing the power of potentiality to ascend into godhood. But Persephone wasn't having any of that.
And so early on in that campaign arc, I think you had set it up to where it was going to that arc was going to revolve around the actions of someone else, right? A different character, Fafina, and not Persephone.
So, yeah, I don't know. This went through like a few different iterations when I was thinking about the New Horizon campaign, because we took Persephone from a Waterdeep Dragon Heist group game, and when that when that campaign concluded, the first thing we did was kind of an epilogue of that, where they were kind of still dealing with the aftermath of that Waterdeep campaign, and it struck me while we were doing that epilogue that like we were really on somebody else's quest still. Like Persephone was still pursuing other people's goals. And then I was heading us up. I was actually going to integrate it into being Icewind Dale next. And that was going to be somebody else's story and somebody else's goals as well. Her ex-boyfriend Maverick was going to go up into the north, and that was the only connection he had to Icewind Dale. Like it was so far removed from anything that was going on. So I was like, what if the main character's, what if the main character's god was involved in some kind of twisted way? And I introduced the concept initially, like you said, through a character named Fafina, and it even then it was still kind of Fafina's story. And so I had to kind of like course correct when I realized that even after bringing in the main character's god, we were still telling somebody else's story.
And if I can interject, as a player in these instances, none of this was a problem for me. I mean, Persephone and I were still having a really good time, but it ended up developing in such a way that really helped her to mature and come into her own as a character as we followed. And I talk about this on our blog post on this same topic. Ended up following more of a chosen one type of arc where it was Persephone coming into her own, figuring out her destiny, her role, her position with her people, the Saudade. And so if you can't quite, I don't know, I wanted people to hear this process because it's not always the most apparent problem, I think, and it can manifest at different times in your game. And so that was one of the things I wanted us to be able to talk about is how do we kind of recognize when this is going on, maybe when we should focus more on the PC themselves, and then what are some of the ways that we can go about doing that?
I don't know if this flows from your. I don't know if this flows, but I was just thinking like, if I feel like it's a frequent problem in D&D games where the players have to ask themselves, or I think as a DM, I'm always asking myself, why would the players do the next thing? Why is this on them? Why is this their quest? And like the answer is like a little bit, at least there's kind of the social contract of like, we want to play D&D, so we're not just going to refuse any hook that the DM gives us, right? Like we're all there to sit around the table and have fun and throw dice and tell stories, right? And so on one end, like out of character, out of game, like there's definitely kind of that understanding that, something magical is going to happen as long as we all kind of go with it, right? But then, like in game, that's a really interesting question. Is like, why the PC? And yeah.
So with that, I think part of what we're trying to say is if you're stuck on that, one of the answers can be because of their backstory, because of what's happened to them. And I'm using backstory really loosely here, so it doesn't have to be where they were born or where they're from or this traumatic event that happened to them when they were 7. It can be more about who they are, but you're kind of trying to find a through line or a theme in the PC story, part of what makes them tick. So you're tapping into their motivation as a character. So what do they respond to? Are they really bothered by injustice? Do they really want to make more money? I don't think that's the most interesting goal, but that's one we see pretty often. I would push on that one more like, why. Does this give them a sense of security? So are they security oriented? Are they searching for some form of success? Was their grandmother a famous adventurer and then she disappeared in the middle of the mountains? And we all, when we put ourselves outside of our comfort zones to do something, it's often because either something we believe about ourselves or some sort of question that we have about the world and how it works, or something that we're kind of trying to find the answer to, whether in ourselves or in some sort of external reality. And so as DMs, that's part of what we're trying to do, what we're trying to set up our PCs to do. And so if when we're stuck, or when you want to get even more out of your player or find other ways for them to um, involve their character in the campaign, the more you can center the story around that character, I think tends to work really well. Matt Colville has that really great YouTube video where he's comparing this is from a couple of years ago, I think, where he's comparing his campaign and the questions in the campaign to Critical Role, right? And he's saying that Critical Role, it's very much, I think he compares it to Lord of the Rings, where the evils in the world are manifestations of the beliefs and demons of the characters that are part of the campaign. And so what haunts this character, what bothers them, what gets them riled up, what are they insecure about? So when we can ask those sorts of questions, those are the kind of things that we want to bring in. And so we're looking at kind of an emotional through line to run across the campaign that involves their personality, their past. And it doesn't always have to be on a really deep level. It doesn't always have to operate across a long line or a long thread even.
So if that's the case, and the incorporating character backstory is a lot about looking at those themes and predilections and motivations and things like that, I mean, can you think of examples from our game where that's occurred for Persephone or any of your other characters?
I mean, so for Persephone, I think the arc you were just talking about is a good example, but with the way I set her up for our Waterdeep campaign was that she had gone back to Waterdeep to help her mother. And so most of the campaign arcs or the hooks for Persephone involve her family. So she, is going to do this to help her mother. She's going north to help her brothers because they're being attacked by manticores. Her father needs help with this other thing. And so it's, her family is kind of key to who she is. And some of that is set up with her character as well, being part of these interplanar travelers who are kind of without a home but always searching, and this like foundational belief and story. But for her, what grounds her in the world and who she is, what's most important to her, are her family and her people. And so yeah, I think I was writing about that in that post too, if I can refer to my notes. So I feel like when you are pulling on Persephone's backstory as the DM, you're looking at her heritage, her family, her goddess Cassandra, the goddess of fate. And then these are things that reappear across her journey. And then the scale of those things has certainly grown. But sorry, I saw the comment about how long her name is. The scale of those things has certainly grown, but does that make sense?
Yeah, well, like I was just gonna say, like it's such a pleasure to DM for you as a player, because like you're always making characters that have these really that have multiple things and multiple threads for the DM to pull on. Like you just listed, like Persephone is very family driven, but she's also heavily involved with Cassandra, the goddess of fortune. Like, oh, there's one thread. Oh, there's another thread. But she's also, like very interested. Like her whole culture is steeped in story and the power of story, right? Like, oh, we have we can do so many interesting things with characters that are multifaceted, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the weaknesses of having a bunch of characters running around the Sword Coast that are just driven by accumulating wealth, right? Like if that's really it, then there's only one thread to pull on, and all you have to do is dangle a sack of gold coins. But if it's something else, like what drives the accumulation of wealth, or what drives the adventuring, or why does it matter if you are the one to take out the gnolls, right? Like that, once you can identify that as a DM, and once your players have done, I feel like, their work, D&D is like a co-creative experience, right? So like once they've done their work too, there's just so many more rich and interesting directions to go.
Well, maybe we can talk about that player side of things for a second, because if we use Persephone as the example, I had an idea about her family, I had an idea about her people, and this specific prompt to go help her mother. But a lot of the rest of it, especially what does it mean to follow and serve the goddess of fate, like those sorts of things have come about as we've played. So that's the kind of thing that I've developed as I've gotten to know Persephone better with these different prompts to see sometimes spontaneously how does she respond in this situation, and at other times it's more upon reflection, how's she feeling about or wanting to operate inside of this space. Um, well, I have, maybe we can look at Tales of Eldora and Gareth. Um, oh, they got a peek behind the screen. That's so funny. So how much of Gareth's backstory did you know when we started Tales of Eldora?
Well, I'm a really good and responsible D&D player, so I had a full novel written about Gareth before I got started. I'm just kidding. I had like so I knew that we were going to be playing Descent into Avernus, and I knew that there were infernal war machines in it, and so I made a cleric of the Forge because I thought it'd be cool to be able to forge extra spikes to put on the infernal war machine for running over demons. That was the extent of my backstory. I thought it was. I kind of had an idea for, like, I don't know. So many D&D character backstories are kind of like cringy, and you need to brush some
Oh, I love them.
bangs into your. It's got to have like lots of tragedy in it. I was an orphan of orphans, and so I wanted to, like, what if my character had like a normal life and a family, and then I inserted some tragedy into that after all. But I didn't have too much for him. I got a sense of him as a forge cleric, and then from there I wanted to have him have a family, and so that to me meant that there was a level of stability and consistency. And when you told me about Respite as a place where people kind of have to scrabble their way into comfort and have to struggle and stuff like that, I got a sense of him as being very driven and motivated and deeply loyal to what he felt was important. And then after that, I personally like to think about how could that character trait, like on a, what is this, on a plane, on a spectrum, on a spectrum, how could a strength like being steady and loyal, on one hand, also be a weakness in other areas, and then kind of how can I turn that up into something interesting? And so, like, he's super steady and loyal to the things that he's decided are important, and then other aspects, if it's not these things, then the other stuff, even if it's important, can fall away if it's not serving this.
And so one of the things that I knew, so if we were looking at, like, okay, we want to start a one-on-one Descent into Avernus game, when I was looking at DMing that, one of the things I had read lots of people saying is, like, okay, you need to have some way of connecting the characters to, if we're in the Forgotten Realms space, you need to have a way of connecting the characters to Alterel. And I was like, great. So I need like a family member, somebody important to be there. They disappear into hell. The character has a reason now to go to hell. Because that was like the big question for me with that campaign is what kind of person is going to be like, okay, I'm going to hell. Here we go. I mean, we have lots of those stories, but there's always a reason. Like you don't just go. And so I wanted to make sure that I in the story setup could give you a good reason to kind of latch on to that. And so I think that's one of the examples of starting with some basic pieces and then figuring the rest out as you go. So you need something to kind of let the player latch on to or give their character a chance to latch on to. And you can kind of give that some space to develop. But I don't know, one of my hopes out of this conversation is that both DMs and players will be more patient with themselves maybe in kind of figuring some of those things out, because I feel like the internal work of for Persephone tying into this chosen one persona took a while for her. Like other people accepted it about her long before she saw that in herself, which I don't know that I would have guessed before. Like that one, we're both really intuitive people, so we just kind of feel our way through it. If that's not quite you, then I'm positive you will find your way.
Can I say too that I think that that can be if you're taking like a published campaign and trying to run it right out of the book, like there's nothing wrong with that. You're playing D&D, that's great. But a lot of the campaign books don't immediately offer great hooks for characters to be super involved, besides like kind of going from task to task at the behest of a patron, or like, you know, for some kind of external award. It's when your characters are doing things because they're internally motivated to do those things that it gets really deep and interesting and engaging. And spending the time to figure out how to stitch your characters' backstories or interests or their predilections into the fabric of a published campaign is a way to make it really kind of go to the next level. And I think recently, like some of the adventures have done an interesting job of supporting that a little bit more with I know Icewind Dale has like backgrounds that are woven into the story, and like you'll have secret cards that, you know, this character has this secret, and so there's a little bit of intrigue, you know, within the party, and there's a chance for that secret to kind of come about in the course of the campaign. Those are really interesting ways that they've, I think, been trying to dial up that immersion for the character. But you know, as the DM, ultimately, that's something that you can do in any published campaign once you identify where those opportunities are. Oh my gosh! And the as you mentioned, the Frostmaiden backgrounds being awesome. We're running Frostwind. Frostwind? Is it Frostwind Dale? Icewind Dale. Icewind Dale. Rime of the Frostmaiden. Okay, I'm there. So we're running Icewind Dale with our school D&D club right now. I'm really excited about one of the secrets. I don't think they watch this, but one of the secrets, if you are in the D&D club, you have to turn it off right now. But
Plug your ears.
Plug your ears. One of the secrets is a red slod that's implanted, and they come into the beginning of the campaign basically carrying around a chest burster, right, a ticking time bomb of bloody, gory explosion. I gave that background, that story, that secret to
Oh.
Z got kicked out by the Streamlabs mod again.
No. I'm so sorry. I thought you turned off the Streamlabs.
I don't know how. I'm gonna figure it out though.
So mean.
So okay.
Anyway, you were talking about
Yes.
do they know that there's a slot inside of them?
The player knows. He's like one of my best players. But nobody else knows. And I'm really excited for how he's going to navigate that because his character isn't super into sharing with the group, you know? So we might get to a situation where it's like there's a real obvious way for the secret to be revealed. Yeah.
And he's dead.
Yeah. Well, and that's an interesting problem too. I'm gonna try to kick Streamlabs out of the chat. Get out of here.
Okay. While you do that, you had jotted down a couple other ideas for PC backgrounds. And friends in chat, if you guys have any questions as we're talking about this, that would be awesome. And here in a minute, I think we'll kind of transition from this to just kind of a more general hangout time. If there's a grudge that the PC has or a particular enemy, or something that they want, like a place to call home, or a value that they hold near and dear, if you're really stuck, see if you can tap into their class. So what are some of the upcoming abilities that they have, and how can you both set them up in positions of strength, and how might their class be a bit of a liability or a way to kind of push their buttons and make them really care about this thing. So I always play druids, and so if and it's not always like, okay, this person is abusing the environment, kill them. Like, it's not always so black and white, but my characters really don't appreciate people like using their power, and people in a position of power or authority abusing that power, especially with the way that tends to kind of leak out into the world around them.
Do you remember when I baited you into a situation where you thought one thing was happening and then something else was happening, like early on?
Which time? I feel like that's happened multiple times.
Well, it was early on when we first started playing, and your character, Eliath, was in a small hamlet where there had been some very aggressive, irresponsible deforestation happening.
Yes.
And I had a half-orc named Turdock who was responsible, and Eliath came in righteous.
You're gonna spoil stuff.
Righteous.
No more of this story. Shh.
Angry. It all worked out in the end.
And that's how it ended. I changed it a bit in Buried Heroes. I just don't want to spoil things in case people are reading right now, even. Okay, so speaking of officially published campaigns, we promised one of our amazing patrons to, yes, Eliath. We promised one of our amazing patrons to talk about running Dragon Heist. And so she has been wondering about incorporating PC backstories into Wizards of the Coast Adventures in general, but specifically she's running Dragon Heist for her son. He's given her some great backstory things to pull from, but she's having a hard time figuring out how to incorporate those things. And I just wanted to say really fast as we kind of get into answering this question, if I'm trying to do something along those lines as a DM, we'll go kind of one of two directions, either with an NPC, because that kind of character approach works pretty well for me. So who's someone that this person will think is interesting? And then if not that, or that plus a particular place. So you're giving them somewhere to be for a particular amount of time, and then the depth of the problem in this particular place will help with how long are they going to be there. So if you're setting up a really long campaign arc or planting seeds that you're going to harvest, a year from now, 50 games later, That's going to be a different type of problem, and it's going to be hidden in a way that is not for, you just want a mini arc in this particular place. So someone with a lot more depth, or somebody who comes in, maybe a villain or something, comes in and then kind of blows back out, is going to be different than somebody who needs the party's help for a few sessions. So do you have any other general things that you wanted to advise, or do you want to get into this Dragon Heist question?
You're I think that you like just touched on something that's really interesting is like the way you incorporate the PC backstory being related to how long of a campaign or how long of an arc you intend to do in the next, like, that's coming up next, right? And the scale of the problem, it just gave me a lot to think about because you're totally right. And we have to be, sometimes we have to be careful with the problems that we introduce, because if you introduce something that seems, cataclysmic and the PC has solved it in the next session, then it kind of makes the scale and the impact of having incorporated the PC backstory seem a little bit off pace. Whereas, if we're more careful with that, then the payoff can be so much richer and like kind of appropriate to the amount of effort exerted by the PC. Yeah, I just thought that was cool.
Yeah.
I would say, like, Dragon Heist is like, I've never played a campaign where a city felt as alive as Waterdeep Dragon Heist did. They did an incredible job with making that space feel rich and vibrant and exciting and full of possibility. I think in my mind, typically when we're playing stuff that we've written, it's a little bit more like, there's magic. Certainly, it's a magical world. It's a fantastical world. There's interesting things happening. But with Waterdeep, it's so dialed up, and there's magic, happening at every corner, and not just magic, but technological wonders. And there's, that person over there is definitely a mass lord, and that one over there is an ex-adventurer, and that one, it just seems there's so much. And so I think if you're getting into incorporating backstory, then if you're playing Dragon Heist, Waterdeep is the perfect place to have somebody you can, I guess, like, it's just wide open for what you can do with your character's backstory, because reasonably anybody could be there. Yeah, Zeke said it's so wildly metropolitan and fantastical at the same time. It's well put. Like, there could be anything going on, and there probably is or was, right? Like, I don't know if that's super helpful, but just like, it's an exciting place. Like, there aren't. I guess I feel like with Waterdeep you can really get away with a lot, and still have it make sense and not be breaking.
Maybe that's part of the issue of, like, maybe it's like there are too many possibilities or too many directions that you could go. And so I would say, if just in case that's it, to pick one aspect of his PC's backstory and see if you can do something with that and tie it to some aspect of the city. So a particular one of the wards in Waterdeep. If you can tie it into the downtime, since that's, I think, one of the coolest parts of that campaign is that I think is really, really unique. Can you tie it to a particular location in the city, or one of the guilds even? And so kind of taking this backstory aspect and then trying to ground it in the place could be really cool.
And that's another cool thing about Waterdeep. Like, you touched on the wards, there's a lot of terrain variety there too. So if they have something touching on, seafaring in their backstory, there's not one but two wards that are intimately connected with that, and one has a totally different vibe than the other. And so, like, I like the idea of tying it to a specific place. And then you also have the factions running around that offer some some interesting possibilities as well.
And with the factions, without getting into too much detail, because we don't want to accidentally spoil Waterdeep for anyone, is it possible to kind of shift the factions in such a way that one might be more appropriate to a particular character type than another? I was thinking about that with just backstory in general. If you have like a very righteous paladin, like it's going to be easy to kind of upset them. Versus, I think if you have like a you're very very subtle rogue who likes to play it cool, it might be harder to get them to latch onto something. But somewhere as you keep digging down, there's going to be something that they respond to, something that they care about, and then that's the button that you push. And until you get to that point, just keep trying different things. And I mean, and that's part of the maybe the frustration of the people in the world is that this person seems relatively inflappable, but you know that there's more going on.
Definitely. Waterdeep has so many possibilities. I like too that with the factions that you can twist them, or like their attitudes can be slightly different than they're presented in the books too, without being too far off. Like, what if your character, I don't know, like the Emerald Enclave, right, is like this righteous band of conservationists that will do anything to preserve the natural world. Well, like again, we were talking a little bit about things being on a spectrum. On one side, in one place of the spectrum, that's like a totally righteous thing. You're like hoorah, and then on another side of the spectrum, you're you know doing acts of violence against people who are just like uh, like making a living doing meat packing or something in the north part that I can't remember, right? Like, so you can take aspects of those different factions and think about like how that would play out on a spectrum and get some interesting results to where characters that might normally ally themselves with the general premise of the concept, when taken to an extreme, are kind of recoiling from this. And that's how that's another idea for how you can take the existing material and tweak it to fit in with a character's backstory.
So is that kind of like playing with their ideal and their flaw, and especially putting those two things on a spectrum and then locating different aspects of those things in the world?
I think totally. Said it better than I did.
I think you said it perfectly. Okay, is there anything else that we want to say about incorporating PC backstory? I want to add really fast before while you think about the answer to that question. There are lots of different ways to get your player like latched onto and involved in a campaign. We did a video about that before the end of this of last year, and like kind of how to get your player to participate more, those kinds of things, asking those questions. But I think that especially selecting pieces of the backstory and then just letting the others that you don't need right now, just let them sit to the side. They'll find their way in as you go. And then players remember that you are contributing to this world as well. And it's totally fine and I think normal for your character to develop as you go. I think that that's one of the really, especially for a one-on-one campaign, because it's so driven by the PC. I think that's one of the really special kind of options that you have that I know I've been wanting to write a blog post about that, but haven't really found a way to go about it besides being like, just create it as you go. That's fine. That's not quite long enough to have a really
It's
profound
important to post.
Just a headline. That's it.
That's it. Mic drop.
Is there anything else that we want to say about incorporating character backstories or the officially published campaigns backstories?
I don't think so. I think I would just lift up one of the things that you alluded to is like just let it take its time too. It's not something where you have to have everything figured out. In fact, if you have everything figured out, then there might not be as much room to grow over the course of the story, and that's certainly the most rewarding and interesting experience that I typically have as a player in D&D is like I'll have a sketch of a person and then they just get more and more real and detailed and um, I don't know, you go from 280p to ultra 4K with how you're seeing the character, and it's really exciting. It's that experience of discovery that is so exhilarating when you're playing D&D. Then rolling nat 20s. That's what keeps us coming back.
I think that was one of my favorite pieces of DM advice that you've given me is present the player with a problem that you don't have a solution for. And I think that that can be really helpful too with incorporating backstory. So if you have a player who's really interested in questions of power, um, tossing in some villains and some just kind of medium-ish people who are a little on both sides of the shady line. Um, Toss them in, kind of see how they get along, see what happens, and just kind of give that space. You don't have to know a way that it's going to work out necessarily. We especially saw that in our Land of Vampires campaign with Braceras, where things turned out really differently than we originally set out for them to. But that was because we gave those characters space. That can be a little bit harder with the published campaign since there is a trajectory included, but I think definitely give yourself space with the NPCs and with the locations and try to help. If you can make those aspects feel real, the player will find spaces to kind of help their character latch on and kind of bring the whole world to life.
Yeah. Anything else, honey?
Those of you joining us on YouTube, please like and subscribe below, right?
Yeah. All those good things. Hit the buttons and the bells and all that good stuff. But yeah, thank you all, and have a beautiful weekend and happy gaming. Oh, wait, there's one more.
And really fast, sorry. If you have a topic that you'd like for us to discuss on Tabletop for Two, please do send those our way. You can get in touch with me on Twitter at Grove Guardian. You can send us a message, get in touch with us on Instagram or on the contact spot on our blog, wherever. We would love to hear what you guys would like to have us talk about some more.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we'll do this again next week, same time. Yeah.
See you guys next Friday or Tuesday.
All right.
Oh,